We're moving on to agenda item number 6. I'll read it again. Consideration of a discussion and implementation plan to address the Louisiana Legislative Auditor's Office recommendations within the complaint process for students with disabilities receiving special education services audit report. Ms. Jordan is going to fill us in.
Absolutely. So I'm happy to bring this discussion to you all. One that I know will have some public comment on, and that we will ask you all as a panel to actually take some action here for us. So as many of you know, the Louisiana Legislative Auditor's Office conducted a performance audit of our complaint process. They released that report prior to the October Bessie. It's linked in your materials. We discussed that report, added that report to the October Bessie meeting very quickly. And so wanted to bring you all a bit more information, a more detailed response plan, and I'm going to ask permission to also add to that. I'm normally very good about sending you all everything way ahead of time. But I want to add some draft policy language to Bulletin 1573 that is in response. So we moved very quickly. We tried to work very quickly on this to bring you at least a draft language that will codify the Bessie recommendations. I will also preface this presentation by saying we do plan to also take a look at this bulletin a little bit more in depth and maybe go above and beyond what the recommendation said, but we wanted to codify some of that into policy to show you all that we are taking this seriously, we are taking some action, and we will plan to take this draft language that hopefully you all endorse or endorse with some recommendations to Bessie in just a few weeks to at least get some of these processes to help support our families codified into policy based on. And I do want to introduce to you two individuals that have been working very closely across our offices. Ty Maneri is our newest special education attorney, counsel here at the department, dispute resolution coordinator, add all of the things. And we also have Ms. Chastity Hatzfeld. You'll hear a little bit about this, who is filling our new special education ombud's position. I cannot say ombudsman, ombuds or ombudswoman. And so we're very excited to have Chastity and the support that she's going to bring to our agency and offer to our families as a response, part of a response to this, but just offering that additional support to our families across the state. So with permission, I would like to bring this, also make sure everyone got a copy as well as the public as well. Do I need a motion, Nikki, to enter this piece? It's part of, okay, and we'll add it to board docs as well for additional public meeting requirements. So you have some supporting docs, another supporting document that supports this item. We called it, it's really a more detailed response plan that tells you all our agency's actions that we have taken thus far, and what are some of our initial next steps, including codifying some of these recommendations into policy. And so during our time this morning on this item, I want to build a shared understanding of dispute resolution, just kind of give a broad overview of what dispute resolution is in our state, what we do offer, explore the background a little bit more, the timeline of the audit. Some of you may be familiar with that, and so I may move a little fast so we can hear public comment and have discussion and then get ready to take our action. But if you need me to slow down, panel, definitely tell me, Meredith, to slow down. And then also understand that response plan. I am going to give you some time because I gave this to you just a few minutes ago, I am going to give you probably 5 or so minutes. We'll pause and actually let you take a look and review the response plan in addition to the draft language as well. So IDEA governs how we provide early intervention, how we provide special education and related services to our students with disabilities across our state. We are also required to have a reasonably designed general supervision system. Our dispute resolution processes are one way that we do this and provide oversight and provide some procedural safeguards and opportunities for families when they have disagreements within their school systems. And so I like this graphic because it kind of shows you the bigger picture, and we're really going to hone in really to what this audit covered within our dispute resolution system in our state, really focused in on formal complaints. So every state agency, as a requirement, is required to provide a process for dispute resolution and also policies for how we manage complaints. That is Bulletin 1573 here. And so this process is intended to ensure that disputes, disagreements between families and our school systems are resolved in a manner that protects the rights of the children in our state with disabilities. And so a couple of things when we talk specifically about formal complaints that I wanted to provide an overview here. Under IDEA, we are required to provide that process to receive written formal complaints from the public. We're required to define what a formal complaint includes, and that it, based on federal law, must require a signature and has to be submitted. It can be submitted via email. We still have some families who mail things to us, and that's fine too. But those complaints, a formal complaint, does have to be signed per federal law. We are also allowed flexibilities under IDEA to provide some additional resources and structures, but we're not required. And so you saw some of those additional options also outlined in the report when we talk about IEP facilitation, mediation that we provide at no cost to families. And so those are not pieces of dispute resolution that are required by IDEA. Those are some things as a state that were put into place as additional supports, less adversarial supports to help families and help parents resolve and work through disagreements with their school systems. And so one of the other things that is in that clear definition and really defined by IDEA is that a formal complaint has to have that statement of the violation. It has to have the facts stated around that and the details around that violation. And again, whatever that alleged IDEA violation is, and it has to be signed and submitted to us as an agency. And so dispute resolution supports disagreements that arise throughout our students' and parents' interactions in the special education process. And I really like how this visual lays out and puts to the forefront that our parents are a vital part of these processes and the identification from start to finish in that educational journey. And so this is the foundation, this is that compliance foundation that dispute resolution is there to help support families with. Whether those disagreements happen during the child find process or whether those disagreements happen around IEP services, right? So this is actually a graphic that is adapted from CADRE, which is a national organization, the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution in Special Education. And it kind of outlines the continuum of supports, even outside of, as an SEA, our dispute resolution responsibilities. But what is that continuum all the way from prevention and how we help support, educate, and inform parents up front, how we provide professional development and technical assistance to LEAs around IDEA law and procedures so that honestly, hopefully, we can prevent or lessen disagreements, right? We don't ever want to go to that most adversarial for our parents having to fight. And so it goes all the way from that prevention. What are the things that we do educationally and support-wise to help educate and support and prevent some of those disagreements, all the way to the conflict resolution circle would involve all of those things as a state or as an LEA. So LEAs also have early resolution representatives. You saw that outlined in the audit. And you'll see something, I'll talk through our plan that references early resolution contacts. But all of those things that are happening for conflict resolution, where we engage with a person or a process here at the department to help us get to a resolution. We have procedural safeguards that are there to help support our parents, all the way to parents have those options ultimately when none of those things are working, going all the way to legal action, litigation, legislative action around getting support. And so it's kind of that continuum that hopefully by design a lot of disagreements are resolved with minimal interventions and support. However, we do have those increasing levels of how do we support parents to work with their LEAs to resolve their disagreements. So as a result of the audit, you have on your response plan handout, I didn't rehash them here in these slides, but you have the LLA 9 recommendations there. And we really thought through, in the weeks and months since we've received this report, what are the big buckets that these recommendations are calling for us to improve? And so really thought this through in 3 critical areas. One is updating processes and procedures, which we're going to talk through how we're going to codify some of those specific to the audit in policy as well. Some of the recommendations, probably 3 or 4 of them, were around website updates, transparency for families, and then the other big critical area and bucket was really around some additional stakeholder resources and resources for families about these processes. And so that's how we kind of bucketed out what are these recommendations really calling us to do and asking us to do. So you all have a much more detailed outline as part of the response plan, so you can kind of see through here on this outline at every month what specific steps have we already taken through November. I can't believe it's already December. And then what we plan to continue, what actions we still need to take through the months of December and even in the spring to where we really feel like we've fully addressed all of the recommendations there. But in a nutshell, we have the audit recommended that we provide some additional training to our call center. We have done that. We have provided internal and conducted some internal test calls to our call center, showing that we now have a much higher percentage rate, 90-something percent, I believe, the last time we checked, where they are providing the correct answer. However, you also know that in November now, we've hired a special education ombudsman as well that's also going to help us funnel all parents to one person and even connecting better, if we get someone who calls the call center, connecting them better to that one individual to help support our families. We've updated some web resources. You'll see in the detailed timeline of response what we have done. And we still have some of those web resources and web updates to make. Also, reminder that our agency is going to be launching a new website, updating our website quite a bit in the coming new year. So we will have to make sure that we are on top of that when the update happens, that what we have updated here transfers over nicely, is accessible to families, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to flag that we'll also be tackling a new website release too, that will be more accessible and family friendly as well. But we have added our forms in Spanish. We have additional languages that are being worked on currently. And we were asked to add, a couple of the recommendations were to add our Louisiana Parent Training Information Center and our Families Help at Family Center's contacts directly onto our dispute resolution page. And so we've done that. We had those contacts elsewhere, but specifically adding them there will make them more accessible if families are specifically looking into dispute resolution options, and they have those contacts that will pop up that they can also contact for assistance with that as well. And then a couple of other things I want to really call your attention to on here. We've talked about adding Ms. Chastity to our team. Also this past month, I followed up with the parents. So within the report, there were 13 parents who the report stated we did not respond to. And so I will tell you all, there were, there are challenges and OTS challenges when pulling a year's worth of inbox emails. But I requested from the auditor those 13 individuals, the date that they contacted me, so I knew and was sensitive when I called these individuals of when they had emailed us, and a copy of the email that they had sent. And so went through, and some of those were not IDA related. The ones that were, there were a couple still that weren't IDA. I reached out of those 13, there were 3. We did find that there were 2 or 3 of those parents who had been through our early resolution process and had reached agreements with families. And so I reached out to 3 individually. I had 1 individual reach back out to me and say, I would love a conversation. And we did. It was a great conversation. There was no further action to take at this time with that. Everything had been resolved. And so I wanted to feel, our agency wanted to feel comfortable that we had reached back out to any parents who felt like they had not been received that response and that were still possibly hanging out there with no resolution. And so we feel confident now that we have done our due diligence for those and reached out to those parents. So you'll see a couple of other things that we're going to be completing even in December, adding accessible versions of our dispute resolution forms for screen readers for individuals who are blind or visually impaired and who want to independently go on and file complaints and be able to access that on their computer. So we're working on those things to update in December. And you'll see here, this is the big one, is the policy revisions. So once I kind of go through a high-level overview of this timeline, I'm probably going to pause for 4 to 5 minutes to let you all really take a look as a panel and certainly as the public, take a look at this so you have time to digest this as well. And you'll see one of the recommendations as well was for us to post redacted versions of formal complaints, so that's accessible to the public so that you know what formal complaints we are getting. And so we plan to do that every summer annually. We will post those redacted versions of the formal complaints, much like we do. We're required to do that for due process hearings and decisions. So this isn't required, but something that we agreed with the auditor. So let me give y'all about 5 minutes, panel, to really digest this. I really want you to digest the policy. So everything that is underlined in the policy draft is what we took from our recommendations and want to codify here. I will say these recommendations are to make this more accessible, easier for families. This is not something that we are asking more to do of families. This is falling on us as an agency for additional processes and things that we need, that we will do to help this process be more accessible and easy to families. The one that you see struck through is not removed. It's pulled out and added to E. We just felt like it read better a little bit there. It's not really something that the complaint must include. And then go to number 3. That's really a whole separate thing. So we just pulled it out of there and added it to E. I hope that made sense. But I'm going to stop talking and give y'all about 5 minutes. So at 11:22.
Looks like everyone's ready about a minute early. Is that what I'm about it?
Okay. Great. So, hopefully you all have these next couple of slides that do break out the recommendations into how we thought about these in big bucket topics. So the ones that we felt like were really about processes, and those are really the ones that you'll see we tried to capture those as much as we could. If it was something that was capturable in policy, these are likely the ones that you see in here. And then we had two recommendations which were really about website updates. So those are captured in our timeline as well, and how we're going to address those. And then, of course, some stakeholder resources. There were two recommendations really about increasing stakeholder resources, posting those formal complaint results to have that transparency. And so we've have that plan to do that also listed in our timeline. So one of the other things that was requested and that we want to bring to DESE are some key performance indicators. How do we define success in this way? How do we define success when we think about supporting dispute resolution in our agency? And so I'm bringing to you a couple of targets. A couple of these are federal targets that address dispute resolution. And then I've got a couple that are state generated that I want your thoughts on as we conclude. So these three are federal targets. They are included as part of our annual performance reporting to OSIP and the U.S. Department of Ed. The first one measures, we do an annual parent survey, and we are required to specifically ask a question and report the number of parents who report facilitated involvement as a means of improving services within their LEA. So how well is my LEA supporting my child with a disability in that school system? And we also report on the percent of resolution sessions. So these last two really get to dispute resolution. The percent of resolution sessions resolved through settlement agreement prior to due process. So you can see IDEA really wants agencies, families, and LEAs to use the least adversarial processes to help resolve disagreements. And then the percent of mediations that also result in mediation agreements. And so these are federal targets that we don't have control over. We can't change them. We can change them as part of a larger stakeholder group, but they are pretty set in place, and the indicator is set in place. But wanted to share these with you and how these connect to this work. Now the next two, really, these are not federals. That's why it says NA for federal target. These are really state targets. So we thought, okay, well, let's look at the percent of total parent formal complaints that are resolved, and the percent. The next one is one that is extremely new. I want your thoughts about what this captures, and how we define success in this dispute resolution process. But the percent of noncompliance identified, whether that's during monitoring, whether that's formal complaints, hearings, corrected as soon as possible, but in no case later than 1 year. And the reason it says that is all of those different pieces, so we're trying to capture a lot there, but all of those different pieces honestly have different timelines. So they're very strict due process. Dispute resolution, even our formal complaint process, has very specific deadlines and dates as far as when those corrections and decisions and then corrections are made. But for some of these, so the latest, however, so IDA, when we look at monitoring and issues of compliance that we find during monitoring, IDA says you have a year. So that's the longest, but just know that as far as dispute resolution, we are following the dispute resolution timelines. Those things are happening and resolved and followed up on way in advance of a year, in fact. So wanted to share these, and I know during our discussion, and I'll definitely want your input on this as well as the policy as well, and how you think this represents, does this measure success, and how do we define success when we talk about how we deliver our dispute resolution process and help families resolve complaints. So I'm going to end on this note, that, as we work to implement improvements to this process, to dispute resolution for formal complaints, which is really what we're here to address around the audit recommendations, we're continuing to implement a robust system of supports to districts. And even I would say to families, do we have improvements to make? Can we always do more? Yes. But we want to be in that bubble where we're proactively preventing instances of dispute in the first place, where we're building capacity alongside our LEAs. And so some of the ways that we do that are at our Teacher Leader Summit. I mean, we kind of have an internal joke that it's really a diverse learner summit, and we're proud of it. We have a lot of sessions, a lot of professional development that's happening there. We are conducting regional tours now. We have SPED directors meetings that we are meeting regularly with them. We are talking about compliance. We're talking about results and improving outcomes, supporting our families. How do we do these things better? We are supporting SPED fellows, new special education directors who are interested in leading this work and building their capacity and informing them of these things as they step into brand new roles within our LEAs. Updating our websites, a lot of that you've heard about, and some of the things that we're going to continue to do. But suites of guidance, tools, our office hours, our webinars, and then we could talk about some of our family support partnerships and how those are proactive things. And we certainly hear and appreciate you all's input and the parents and the families who are on this panel saying, here are the challenges that parents have, and working with our Families Helping Families and asking them, hey, what are you hearing, so that we can be proactive as a department and try to address some of those concerns as well. So I'll leave you all here as we open up this discussion with a couple of questions for consideration, and then just a reminder that we're going to ask our panel to endorse this implementation plan and the draft guidance, or endorse with a recommendation for XYZ. That way when we can go to Bessie and we have the input of this group, the support of this panel and what this recommendation, and so that you all support and believe and know that we're taking this information seriously. We are putting some things in place. We know we still have some additional pieces outlined to do, but that we are taking it seriously and have really thought through how to make sure these 9 recommendations are put into place. So a couple of things to consider as we start discussion. And I know we have some public comment. Are there any additional, so we talked about the key performance indicators. How do we define success in this area? Is there something else that we would recommend or consider? How well does our implementation plan address all of those recommendations? Do we feel like that we're covering it? Remembering that we still have, and we recognize there are still steps to take. We're not finished, but we have a plan to make sure we're addressing all 9. And then are there opportunities to strengthen the implementation plan for even stronger alignment? And so with that, I think we are ready to open.
So we'll go ahead and we'll first take questions or comments from the panel, and then we'll move to public comments. And I'm going to start off and just ask for clarification on something. So on the key performance indicators, the percent of resolution sessions resolved through settlement agreement prior to due process hearing, it indicates that, let's say for 2021, 58% were resolved. Now, is that when a due process was requested, or is that when there was a state complaint that moved on? Are you saying that basically 40% of state complaints went to due process?
No, this is of our due process hearing request, and you can see I actually put the numbers on there, 9 out of 22, because one of the things that we have recognized with these federal targets, when the numbers are so low, so now we know from the audit we had 61 formal complaints, but there were 22 requests for due process. 9 of those were resolved in that resolution process.
So and then I'll go ahead and kick off with the comment for number 1, additional key performance indicators. I think you need a timeline that LDOE must respond to, whether that's 30 days, 60 days. Because one of the things that, from a parent's point of view, that frustrates parents a lot is because we advocate for parents to make a statement. We can't make a statement. Back to the electrician, what the state weigh in on this.
And I think too, one thing that might help with this is this process that in the policy change, that even if the complaint is not complete, the department still has to follow up to try to get the necessary information. I think that that will really help, so that families know that something was omitted, and so I think that that will be pretty important.
I have a thought. So also in line with the timeline, which I like, I'm also wondering what follow-up options families have. So there are families who are going to be persistent. They want to call. Is there possibly a way for a person to be assigned to a case so they have a name? Because the department has a notorious reputation of people calling and leaving messages and it being passed along, but never knowing who it is they have to speak to. And it could be because of a shortage of staff. But since you're addressing this, parents need to know they need to know the person who to contact.
Yes. And so that is definitely something that we are planning to implement, and that is literally our SPED Ombuds role. So our parents will have direct connection to Ms. Hatzfeld. And so I think that is going to help those processes and those issues, and having who do I contact, right, versus an email. I'll also say one of the things that we did add on here, tied to what you all are saying in terms of a timeline, but I think one of the things that came out of the audit was, if I file a complaint and it doesn't meet federal requirement, and then I don't hear anything, or I don't know what else to do. So we have codified that and put a process in place, and putting that into policy, saying if a complaint lacks any federally required information, they are going to receive contact from a person at DOE to help them have that notice and understanding what are those deficiencies and what are some next steps that I can take to remedy that. Yeah. Absolutely, Christine. We've thought a lot about that, and we definitely try to connect with you all and connect you with the parents. One of the other things that we've committed to doing in our response plan as well is and we've been collecting this from our directors. We've got it from our LEAs. We're still working with a couple of our charters, but we're going to post an updated list on our dispute resolution page that has that LEA early resolution representative. Usually it's the SPED director in that system, and that way families have at their fingertips, because sometimes they don't know who to call or who to contact or with that contact, and so families will have that list, and families will have easier access to that information as well. So if they feel like they want to engage with us, great, we're here, but here's the person I need to talk to, who is the supervisor of special education in my system. Let me try them first. So I do think that will help, and we should have that list up this month. Yeah, really great.
So I want to say, first, as a panel representative, I think y'all done a lot of good work on this. Also, I'm active in looking and teach a lot of the grassroots agencies, and have gotten a lot of communication on this. So I do want to say that I think some of the things are bringing up the website, having the ability to find this information easily on the website, and it's not buried. That's been one of the things that has come up in a lot of our communication. So thank you so much for that. Also, kind of what Christine just brought up is, and it's brought up a couple of times in here, and I want to say it's almost redundant, but maybe it needs to be redundant for a reason, that if your complaint hasn't followed the proper channels, we need to get you to follow those proper channels, because it doesn't need to come straight up to the top first. It needs to go to the districts first and everything. So by ensuring that that's done, that's wonderful because we need our parents to understand that they have to start there and not just always jump to the state department. And utilizing the ombuds. This is a new person, so that's wonderful. We use that a lot in elderly, having been a nurse home administrator, and maybe helping parents understand that ombud's role is truly as I don't want to even use the word mediator, but they're very neutral. You know, they're there to help explain on both sides too. So I think that's a wonderful concept that we're bringing in as well.
I'd like to add a comment to Tamara, your comment. So, it does concern me a little bit that some families will not want to go straight to their school district because they are afraid of retaliation. So, and they will not lodge a complaint if they're fearful of retaliation of any kind. That's my concern about doing that. I mean, I do appreciate the fact that you should go through that route, but we get lots of phone calls about why they leave schools because they don't talk to people because they're afraid of retaliation. Real or imagined, it's a fear. I see heads nodding over that.
This isn't quite related to the 1, 2, 3, just some general comments. And I could have missed this in the presentation. The dispute resolution coordinator, is that like a specific person? Who is that? Is that Ty? Okay. I wondered. And then with this new policy, is there, how are we going to notify parents of the change? Is this going to go in the handbooks that we get sort of at the beginning of the year? Or is that being considered as a way, like how are we going to let families know outside of like just, you know, not everybody's connected to an FHF center or PTIC, like there's tons that still fall through the cracks. So I guess what is the plan to get this out to parents? And then one last sort of comment, I don't want to open a big old can of worms, but is there discussion about the overall monitoring system and how it's shifted so dramatically even before COVID, but even, you know, COVID made things more difficult. There's a lot of just like desk monitoring going on where, you know, districts are submitting paperwork, but we used to have a very robust monitoring program that I think we should look back or have conversations around how do we get back to that, because there was built-in special education, like parent, I don't know, not a forum, but like they would come to the school and it was just such a more productive. There wasn't this battle. I mean, we're always going to have battles between parents and schools, but it used to be just such a better process than what we have today. So is there any discussion around how do we improve the overall monitoring system that I think could maybe could have helped capture some of this prior to this escalated into this level So just some thoughts there.
Yeah, definitely having those discussions now. We are still in that process with the auditors as well, specifically looking at monitoring. The biggest discussion is we still have robust monitoring. It's the capacity, the amount, how much. We have many stakeholders who prefer that on site. And so really looking at, and OSIP just released some new not new, but additional general supervision guidance that clarifies and spells out some additional issues around general supervision. One of those, they talk a bit about monitoring and how states should be getting to LEAs within a 6-year cycle. And so we're definitely having those conversations, Ashley, and it will definitely be something that we come back here as well to talk more about.
So at the last Bessie meeting, well, at our last seat meeting, I made a promise to you all that I was going to report concerns around a variety of issues that this panel had at the next Bessie meeting, and I did that in October. I also made the motion that referred the auditor report and the other parent group to Seap, because I think that this is a great opportunity for all of us to channel our inner Bambi, who has been telling us that, that this board or this panel really has a role of making recommendations to the department. And so, Ashley, to your point, maybe monitoring needs to be a KPI, right? Like that we need to have a KPI around monitoring, and so that we know that we are meeting our targets when it comes to assessing IEP compliance. And so it would be my hope for this panel as we move forward, because this is just what we see today, I think, is just the beginning of the reforms that the department is going to be making in response to that audit. And so I really want to encourage this panel to be a big part of that and to push the department to do what is in those audits, their suggestions, and then also the things that you think ought to be included in it, because there is nobody, and I mean nobody on Bessie, that knows this area as well as this panel does. And you have unique insight into what we need to be doing to improve the services that are being made available to our students with disabilities. And so my term on Bessie ends in December, so I won't be back. This is my last seat meeting, so I apologize for being double booked. But I want to say I'm making a promise. It's a little emotional. I've learned so much from being a part of this panel, and I promise that I'm not going to let what I've learned go to waste, and I'll continue to advocate to find that Bessie member that really is going to care about special education in this next term, and to work with them to make sure that they can see the value in this panel and what you have to offer. So thank you, guys.
Any other comments from the panel? Yes.
I think what Ashley said was really important. I think the first KPI that we have at the top, the parental involvement one, I mean, that number is extremely high just because it's on the number of respondent parents and not like the total parents sent out. Maybe a KPI, and this is non-federal target related, maybe we have a KPI for polling the parents on whether or not they're aware of the new updates that we've made to the complaint process, but also capturing that number of how many people are not responding to this. Because I feel like 86%, in knowing that we have over 86,000 students with disabilities in Louisiana, I don't believe that we receive such a large amount of responses. So I think that we need to be tracking that part of the parental involvement so that we actually get a clear indication of how well the information is being put across to our parents. And on an unrelated note, from the COPA crosswalk that was listed in the list, maybe we should utilize our state legislators to do maybe a tri-annual audit of or investigate our SEAs to just ensure that we are following our new dispute resolution system.
I have a clarifying question. I'm sorry, you guys, I'm a little sick. So Meredith, the 61, there were 13 the 13 is just the number that didn't get a response. And so I didn't see it here, and it could be covered by Mr. Hill's comment, but it might be worth adding a performance indicator that tells you the percent of complaints submitted that were responded to within a certain time frame. You could narrow it down to the emails because that's their recommendation, but complaints can be submitted writing, telephone, email, or in person. So I don't know if you'd want to narrow it just to email. But that might be something.
So clarifying this too is just because a parent sends an email doesn't necessarily mean it's a formal complaint too.
Yeah.
So I think like just clarifying what we want to track
Yeah.
too
So-
within that timeline, because that's what we were trying to capture. So with the first one around the percent of total parent formal complaints resolved means within that 60-day timeline. There's a very set timeline for resolving formal complaints from once that formal complaint is received, when that timeline starts ticking for our investigators.
Okay. So my other question was,
So we could add that to be more clear, within
Yeah.
timeline.
well, if it's resolved, that means, I guess, responding to it would fall within that. You have to respond.
Yes,
to
they get a
resolve.
closeout letter. Yes. Yeah.
So my other question is, in the policy at the very end, letter I, it was added that the results will be posted. And then right before that, it talks about the complaint log, which has specific information, the name, the school, the allegation, the outcome. Are those the results, or what are the results? And the reason I'm asking is because on the second page of the response plan, summer of 2024, it says to post redacted versions of formal complaints. So that would, I would assume you don't mean the actual complaint.
Correct. So the tracking information based on the recommendations from the auditor was for our internal tracking, so that we can then use that information to inform monitoring, to inform if we're seeing a large number of complaints from specific areas across the state, it can help us inform. So H and A, when we talk about that log, those are really internal things and processes for us to better inform how we look across the state, where formal complaints are coming from, what are the allegations, and then I, so we wouldn't post a log. That's probably not going to give you a lot of information or be able to be synthesized. But specifically for I, that is that we, and this was a part of the recommendation too, that we post redacted, and there are other states who have elected to do this too, post redacted results of actual formal complaints, but removing all PII names, all of that information.
So the H is the second bullet on the response plan. That's for your internal use.
Yes.
And then I had one other question. So it looks like, and you mentioned this, that you kind of had a goal of not ending the process if someone doesn't meet complaint criteria or doesn't submit all the information that they need to submit. But when I read this, I'm not sure. I'm a little confused. And I guess I would be confused if I was a parent reading this policy. So if you're lacking the federally required information, LDOE reaches out with recommendations for appropriate actions to be taken. But then later, if you lack federally required information, LDOE staff offers instructions to correct it. So I would probably clarify that and then have them agree. Because are you offering them instructions to correct their complaint so that it can move forward? or are you kind of referring them to a different
So
agency or something that might be more helpful for whatever their specific?
no, so like someone from Chastity, someone from our team would give them that notice of deficiency. Hey, this is, you indicated you intended to file a formal. Here's what's missing, and here's how you can go about correcting that. And that may include, because we do have to, Chastity is that neutral party third person. Our legal team has to be very careful in terms of not providing legal advice. Chastity can provide some neutral next steps for them. But that may include, and does include, we do this now, saying here's your regional Families Helping Families contact, who may also be able to help you through this process if they need much more detailed assistance in how to do that. But one of the things from the audit and that we've definitely committed to is at least providing that response to say, here, not, I heard somebody say this earlier, just dropping it and saying, giving that response that here is what is wrong with it, and why it's not a formal complaint yet. If that was your intent, here are the things that you need to address, and here's how you can address it. Feel free to send it back to us, right? And so that is the intent there, and requested by the audit. And we've heard that from families and stakeholders as well, so I think it's important.
Go ahead.
So when she was making those comments, something popped in my head. Is there a way to create like a flow chart for parents of the steps, like in a simple one page, so they know you start here, you end here, and this is the steps, sort of in between? I know we've asked other state agencies to create these for, let's just say TEFRA, for example, Act 421, like this is the step, this is sort of how long it takes, to sort of give families a visual of, you're embarking on this journey, this is what it's gonna look like, and these are sort of what you can expect along the way. They can be online, easy accessible that way, or if they're handed to them at a IEP meeting or any other type of meeting that happens, it might be useful and helpful for parents that way.
One of our newest resources is the comparison chart that we've done. So I would ask you all to go look at that and then let me know. It's our dispute resolution comparison chart that kind of tells families what each of those options are. One of the things, and there's actually a visual attached to the audit that may be helpful, and we could certainly post. We worked a little bit on this alongside the auditor. One of the things when you said, Ashley, can we create a step-by-step? So one of the things that we don't want to and have to be careful with portraying to families is that they have to start in one place before they can start anywhere. You can request a due process immediately, right? And so I think we wouldn't create it or communicate it as like a step-by-step, because we want families to know you can start wherever you want along that continuum. But we are certainly agreeable to creating additional resources. Check out the comparison resource, see what you think about that. And we're certainly in our plans to create some additional family resources around these processes.
There's one other family resource. I know they're short-staffed as well and don't always take a lot of cases, but adding disability rights Louisiana as a legal resource for families. They hit or miss on what they accept, but it just a thought.
Okay, so we have a hard timeline of 12:30. We have one more agenda item, so we can move to public comment now. So Ms. Catherine Hart.
Again, Catherine Hart, parent of a child with significant disabilities. So my father was a judge for 25 years, and my husband is an attorney who practices administrative law for a different state agency. And I will tell you, it has been, and I also served as chairperson of SICC, and it's been extremely difficult for us with all of our training and knowledge to navigate this process. Part of this is working with a district who's very uncooperative, and getting the evidence. The Department of Education actually requires a preponderance of evidence to prove in both in a state complaint and due process that the district has violated IDEA. You don't have any discovery rights. At least Bessie has not promulgated any rules for that. So the only way you can get that preponderance of evidence is to request documents through the Parents' Bill of Rights for Public Schools. Well, an uncooperative school district's going to pick and choose which documents they give you. They won't put things in the file. They'll put up barriers to get that, which then means you're going to have to go pay an attorney and file in district court to enforce those rights. That delays your ability to file due process and delays your ability to file a state complaint. And guess what? Our hearing officers, our state complaints, they're not going to go look back further than 1 year. So now you're, however long it takes to get a hearing in district court from when you filed before you file in a state complaint for FAPE, and in our case, even are our state complaints even going to address ADA issues or 504 issues? Because not everything is a FAPE issue, or do we need to go to OCR for all of those? We do need to and look into promulgating rules for discovery, for due process. The Louisiana Administrative Code, it's like 2 books for attorneys to follow on this, where Bessie has 4 paragraphs. I know it was meant to make this much easier for parents, but I mean, if attorneys are having problems with this, 4 paragraphs, I think parents are going to have even bigger problems, because again, if you don't have all the evidence before you file the state complaint, before you file due process, there is absolutely no way to get it. And when you put a teacher or some administrator on that stand who just says, I don't recall, you're going to have absolutely nothing to cross-examine them with. Thank you.
And the second is Charlie Michelle. I'm going to get you your 3 minutes, Charlie. There you go.
Just kidding. Charlie Michelle, parent of 2 children with disabilities, current executive director, Bioland Families Helping Families, and retired and recovering special ed director from an LEA. I wanted to let you know that upon reading the legislative auditor's report, I was left with many thoughts, but I'll share only one of those with you today, since you're only giving me 3 minutes. It's been clear for quite some time to parents of children with disabilities and to the LEAs that the State Department's handling of disputes has been inconsistent at best. And it's these inconsistencies that have created the perception that the system is not fair. This perception has resulted in an increased mistrust of LEAs by parents of children with disabilities, and a reluctance on the part of some LEAs to be totally transparent about the dispute resolution process. I propose that the State Department take the initiative to create a work-study group, task force committee, whatever you want to call it, because we all love a meeting, in order that there could be developed a very specific set of procedures that would include a defined variety of ways that parents can express their complaints, but also that would develop very specific procedures for every step of the process. How is this complaint received? How is it responded to? What's the timeline for that? How are we going to do the investigation? Who's going to do the investigation? Very specific and written out for complete transparency. These stakeholders should include, at a minimum, in my opinion, parents of students with disabilities, special education directors, a superintendent, advocates, a lawyer from the Louisiana Department of Education, a lawyer from Disability Rights of Louisiana, or some other attorney whose practice includes advocating for parents of students with disabilities and individuals with disabilities, and LDOE staff members. The number of LDO staff members should be less than 20% of the total membership, and the number of LEA employees and LDOE staff should not exceed the number of parents of students with disabilities, individuals with disabilities, and advocates for children with disabilities combined. This would ensure that there would be no impression that the task force was merely an activity of showmanship designed to check off the boxes, but that would actually do nothing to accomplish any improvement in the relationship between educators and parents by the way of a more consistent and transparent handling of all complaints received. I've worked on too many committees under the previous state superintendent where the State Department employees comprised as much as 75 or 80% of the membership, and the script was followed by each of them. There was much discussion, but all of the outcomes had been foregone conclusions. I assure you that this was frustrating for both the representatives of the LEAs as well as to the parents on the committee. And I'll leave you with one thought. Developing these procedures, which must include some sort of monitoring of the dispute resolution process from beginning to end by an outside agency or non-LDOE employee, in my opinion, is really not a difficult task. But building a bridge to reconnect families of children with disabilities and the personnel at their schools will be much more challenging and will take much longer. Will it really take legislation to accomplish this, or will panel recommendation to the LDOE in the strongest terms that this should be done because it is the right thing to do and is necessary for us to move away from the mistrust that was nurtured by the previous state superintendent and has not yet been fully sufficiently addressed by the current state superintendent. The LDOE has already agreed with the recommendation of the auditor's report, so this seems a logical step in correcting the identified deficiencies. And if you look, did the 3 minutes up?
Yeah, you said one more thought, and that was like three. At
Okay.
least, Charlotte.
All right. Well, I thank
you did
you
that
all.
perfectly. You said one more, and it's 7
I
seconds
require
left.
accommodations. I am not proficient in the counting. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So that concludes public comments. We just have the two. Meredith, you're looking for a motion to receive and endorse, correct?
Yes, or receive, endorse, and some specific either recommendations to update the KPIs or the policy language or plan. And remember, we've committed to additional deeper looks, as you all have mentioned, to 1573, but want to codify some of these things specifically from the audit now, knowing that additional edits and additional updates will come to 1573.
I make the motion to receive and endorse with the recommendation that came from Mike about implementing some kind of time frame of response. Yeah.
Is there a second? Yes, still a second. All right, we have a first and a second, so I'll go ahead and ask for all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? One opposed. What's your name on the list? That's good.
So I want to make sure, Tamara, so including a timeline within the KPIs that we will respond and resolve within required dispute resolution timeline.
I don't know, Mike, you're the one that made the.
Yeah, so
is it resolve as well, or was it a response?
it was
within
respond,
Yeah.
specifically
Respond.
to respond, and we left it to you to determine what an appropriate, reasonable time frame would be to respond. Because that, like I said, that's what gets parents so upset is when they feel like they're not heard.
Can we have a discussion on that? Like, can there be? I mean, I appreciate her recommendation, but I think there's other recommendations too.
That's why I objected, because there was others that I thought we should
Well,
include.
We can make additional motion. Yeah, we can have an additional motion.
When Ashley had it.
So they were,
Our part, yeah, let's let Nikki tell us how to do it. And include that.
Okay, so we need to amend the motion that we've made. So you're going to have to walk me through. So we have to make a motion to amend the previously voted on and agreed to motion. And if that passes, then we can create the amendment. Is that right? same time. I vote to amend, and I make a motion to amend in this fashion. Okay. So, okay, let me be clear. So there may be 4 additional recommendations. No, it's passed. We don't have a motion on the floor right now. That we voted on it and that passed. We voted on the motion to accept and endorse with the recommendation. That's why I'm saying that's where we are now. She voted no, and she was in the minority, so it passed. We can make a motion for additional. Okay. Okay, so we make the motion to amend, and we vote on the motion to amend, and then we can keep amending. Gotcha. Okay. So, Ashley, you want to make a motion to amend? Okay.
Make a motion to amend the previous motion.
And a second? A second.
To do what?
To add additional recommendations. And there's a bunch. Okay.
Oh.
Oh, you thought I just had one?
No. I thought we had to make a motion to amend, then
Okay, so we can put all of the recommendations now sort of on the
Table.
On the
And then
table.
they can vote, yeah.
Okay.
Need a second before we do that? Yeah. No.
So each one. Oh no.
Well, we'll see.
Mm-mm. Each one. Okay. So do I need to state exactly what you just said? So I make a motion to amend the previous motion to include these additional recommendations. Okay. So my first one is to, while I'm going to look at this chart, I still think we need to create a visual for families to utilize. And I think we can create it in a way that just, if you say start here, so whether that's due process or formal complaint, like it doesn't have to be specific, like you have to start here, but if you start here, here's where to go. Like here's where to go. I would love to come up with something to address Catherine's concerns around discovery. And I know that might not be specific to this because it's more on the legal side, but as a parent who has filed multiple formal complaints in East Baton Rouge Parish, and I'm just going to say the district, it is extremely difficult. It's extremely challenging to go back and request specific documentation to prove the violation of FAPE. Not sure that goes in there, but I want to put that on the record as well. I really liked Mary Lee's comment, and maybe I just need some clarification around pulling out an indicator for when a parent submits a complaint through the dispute resolution email process, that there is an indicator that they were responded to within a certain amount of time, and maybe that sort of piggybacks off of Mike's. So we think that so that addresses that. Monitoring. I don't know how to state it, but I think I think the department really needs to develop, and maybe it comes through this task force that Charlie was talking about, maybe it comes through Seap. We've got to really dive into monitoring, look at that entire process, what it looks like, and get back to, and I'm just going to call it, not that there isn't a robust process, but the process of the past around monitoring. I think that absolutely needs to be in here as well. And I think that's all of mine.
So would that recommendation look like future consideration and discussion around state lines?
I'm okay with that.
So I think we need a second, right, for us to get into some discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. To Bessie. And one more thing, the issue related around notifying parents, of these changes, what does that look like, and also the addition of disability rights. And I don't know if that needs to go in this. I know we talked about it during this process, but if it doesn't need to go in it, that's fine. I just want to make sure that both of those things get addressed.
Is that correct? We need the second. So we have the motion. We need the second for discussion. So I'd like to make a few comments. First, I agree 100% with what you said about monitoring. It's not as rigorous as it used to be. It's not what it used to be. It used to be that LDOE, and they would bring in agents from districts, right? They would create a little group, and they would come into a district and they'd say, I need to see X, Y, Z. And some of it was compliance, and some of it was best practice. And whenever they came in, it affected the culture of the district because they recognized that somebody else was doing it. It's Travis said, I'm not wearing a badge today, but our badge is like, and when we walk into schools, it was like that. And it changes the dynamics a little bit, so I would definitely like to see that. But I don't think that's part of this agenda item. What I would like to recommend is that you ask Seap, because we can put items on the agenda. I would ask you to put that item on the next meeting agenda so we can discuss that too. The second piece is specifically about discovery. I think that goes beyond what this agenda item is to. This agenda item is specific to the process and how that really is responding.
And probably, Ty, you may have something you want me to say or add, but probably would require additional conversations with other, maybe administrative law judges around discovery. I don't think we have that in our.
And when you were talking about difficulty, Ms. Harper, you were talking about difficulty with discovery. That really, I'm the custodian of records. Out the shoe. If a parent asks for the records, they get records, or access to the records at least. So, and I'm not saying that your experience is incorrect, not at all. But I don't know why there would need to be language about discovery if I've got it as an educational record. You're going to get it. And if I'm failing to maintain it as an educational record, there's a process for that too, and I don't.
Right. And I'm not opposed to going back, Ashley, and saying, like, we won't look into it. I see Ty coming up from
Yeah, I think the two processes are getting a little mixed up here. I hear the concerns about discovery in the due process hearings. Those are administered by DAL. They follow the procedural rules, either the Louisiana Administrative Procedure Act, or to the extent we have specific procedural guidelines for the due processes, they use those. We can make regulatory changes to that around production of documents in this context of the due process. There is no discovery in complaints. I am the discoverer in complaints. Nobody has a duty to give me anything in a complaint. You file the complaint, And it's, I mean, if you spend time in law school, but it's more of a magisterial approach, not a judge hearing two sides of a case and then deciding based on those two sides. I'm more like a magistrate presented with an issue that I get to the bottom of. So if a parent tells me a document exists and the school district possesses it, I'm going to make the request for that. There's no duty for the parent to submit that to me. I'm going to request comprehensive student records. And if I don't get it, we're going to follow the typical Louisiana rules of spoliation of evidence, which is if it exists and you're the custodian of it and you can't produce it, we're going to assume it says things you don't want me to know. And that you're going to get a negative presumption if a district can't produce a document that's known to exist. But again, I don't think there's any need to even talk in the context of discovery around complaints. The district will get what I receive from the parent will get what I receive from the district. By the time a final decision's put out, everybody's going to see every document I've seen. To the extent I have interviews, there may be notes that are passed between the two parties, and I don't record interviews. But as far as documentary evidence or videos or anything that's transmittable, those get shifted about. And again, the parent's inability to get it is a problem and a separate issue and a violation of IDEA in its own right, because not only do we have the FERPA requirements, we've got the 600 level IDEA regs that require confidentiality and parental access and all the other. It kind of repeats FERPA in there. So one, that could be added to a complaint if you're having trouble getting student educational records. And in a complaint, it should not be a problem for the parent in that I make all record requests, or at least in the context of the complaint, I will make all record requests that are necessary. Now, of course, before a complaint's filed, or if in the course of a complaint, a parent wants to independently go request records from the district, I'll accept anything from the parent that they've received. But there's no necessity that the parent submit anything in the complaint other than the initial complaint. I'll retrieve the documents, or if we're using a complaint contractor, the complaint investigator will retrieve all the documents necessary and will work with the district to get those.
So when do you get involved in that process? So this is just my ignorance. So a parent who is going to go through mediation, they're going to have the access to all of the things that you're just talking about?
No. In the course of mediation, just a nutshell nutshell process is we'll get the request. It typically comes from the parent, but it's not uncommon to get them from the school district if they're having a dispute that they want some assistance with. If we get that mediation request, we're simply going to confirm with the other party that they're interested in moving forward. If they are, we're going to hand it off to the mediator, and the mediator is going to take over from there. Contact the two parties, try to identify the scope of the issues, and obviously find a mutually agreeable time and place to have it. In some instances, if the mediator knows this is going to be document intensive, or the mediation is around a document, an evaluation report or an IEP, they'll typically request that either from the parent or the district or both ahead of time. But there's really, because of the looseness of mediations and the ability to cover a lot of content, there's no formalized documentation exchange between a mediation. And the mediator would just kind of play that by ear and determine what do they need to mediate this dispute on day of.
The parent could ask the mediator to secure the documents that normally you would be doing if it rises to the more severe complaint. I guess I'm just thinking about if I was a parent and I was asking my school district for documents, and I didn't want to escalate it further. I wanted to be able to do it with a mediator, but I'm kind of flying blind because maybe the district is not providing me with all of the paperwork that I'm asking for. How does that work?
Agreed, and by its nature as a mutually agreed upon process, any regulation you put on there is just incentive for one of the two parties to walk. So, I mean, if whatever authority you give the mediator, it all ends when one party says, I don't want to participate in mediation anymore. And then that would be the end of that mediator's authority. So the mediator's really working off of charisma and the confidence of the parties more so than any authority. Correct. And if it's an IDEA eligible child, that's an IDEA violation. It would come under the complaint or less likely due process because it would have to be a FAPE violation. But as far as a procedural violation, that would come under that. The FPCO, the Family Policy Compliance Office that that oversees FERPA, also has a complaint process at the federal level that doesn't require that the student have a disability. Just if you believe access rights have been violated, the U.S. DOE also has a complaint process for record access issues.
Do I need to take those two out? Okay, so I need to amend my amended motion. Okay, so I will do that and remove the monitoring piece, but I will commit to this group and I will ask that it be added to our January seat meeting, and I will pull the discovery, and I'm not quite sure where to go from there, but there's issues. How it's supposed to work is not how it's working everywhere, so I may just get with you offline. Okay, and that'll work.
Did we, in that amendment, I don't believe that there was a vote on this policy change. Was that part of it? Make sure.
I'm sorry. Talk to the mic. So due to time constraints, as we said at the beginning, we have a hard end time of 12:30. We are going to suspend item 7 and move it. I apologize to the person.
And I want to
smiling.
thank Jana and Jasmine from LCD. We've been working alongside them on this item, and we will definitely have this back in January because it's really important as well.
We'll move it first. It'll be first on the agenda. Okay. So, you need, to move it? Oh, okay. So I'll need a first. I can't. So I need a motion. I make the motion that we table item number 7 and put it first on the agenda and defer. Did we defer? Defer to January. Put it first on the agenda. Can I get a second? Ms. Hargrave. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay. And so I'll make a motion to adjourn. Seconded, Ms. Hargrave. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you, panel members. Thank you, members of the public. You guys' impact is amazing. Thank you for coming.